Alright guys, so the full intent is to make this a weekly series, basically where we take an archetype, we do a full breakdown of the cards in it, and then we go from looking at the cards in the archetype to looking at some user-created decks that I can find online, and then showcasing my own deck. That's sort of what the theme of these videos is going to be. At some point I may have like a cute name for the series, but right now we're just rolling with it as is. First one we did was Cypher, which I'll be honest was super tricky, because Cypher is not very good. Even if there are some cutesy combos you can do within it stuff, for the most part the deck is very lackluster. This one, while not great, is a deck I'm actually having a ton of fun playing around with, and was really excited to do a sort of full in-depth analysis of. Conceptually, Magistus is awesome because it takes lore from the Invoked, it takes lore from the Witchcrafters, it brings a lot of that stuff together, so you'll notice a lot of the artwork has, representations of cards you might recognize, like Alistair. And I think the deck actually has some potential, at least as a casual deck option, so I'm pretty excited about it. With that being said, we're going to jump into it. The way it'll work is we'll go through the archetype, talk about the cards, then we'll showcase some user decks, and then I will show my own deck profile. If you guys do enjoy this type of content, I'm definitely happy to take suggestions in the comments down below. Let me know what other archetypes you'd like to see featured in future videos. These are probably going to be weekly because it does take quite a bit of time to edit, but if you do enjoy them, let me know and I will take any and all recommendations into consideration. Starting off with the monsters, Magistus is a relatively small archetype totaling in around 13 cards currently, so it's not going to be too tedious to cover. But we'll go ahead and take a look at everything. Crowley, the Magistus of Grimoires, is the first one. This level 4 spellcaster is a dark monster. It is Alistair the Invoker. I do believe it's supposed to be him when he was younger. You can look at the art and very much see where that inspiration comes from, as he's holding the Book of the Law, so there are some really neat throwbacks to it. The effect is as follows. You can send one spellcaster monster from your hand or face-up field to the graveyard, special summon this card from your hand. You can declare one attribute. This card becomes that attribute until the end of this turn. So it's really solid to be able to change the attributes of the card. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one Magistus monster you control. Equip it with a Magistus monster from your graveyard, except a level 4 monster. So typically the most common combo with this that I utilize in the deck is going for Bahamut Shark, using this and, your Endymion, which is a level 4. It's a really cute little combo that's not hard to pull off and does give you a Shark and a Toad as your starting board. Depending on what else you open, you can set yourself up for some powerful combos going forward, but it really does depend on the other cards. And unfortunately, as much as I do enjoy the deck, it can be susceptible to bricking a ton, which is one of the biggest things it has working against it. Next one is Riliona, the Magistus of Vare. This is obviously Witchcrafter Madame Vare, which is a cool card, although not great. I do suppose it's better than some of the other stuff in the Witchcrafter archetype, but as a whole, it's not great. Riliona, however, is probably the best Magistus standalone card, with the exception of some of the extra deck cards. And it is a level 4 light spellcaster. If this card is normal or special summon, you can activate one of these effects, add one Magistus spell or trap from your deck to your hand, or return one of your banished level 4 or lower spellcaster monsters to your graveyard. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one Magistus monster you control, equip it with one Magistus monster from your graveyard, except a level 4 monster. What really makes this card solid is the fact that you can trigger its effect off a normal or special summon. So as we go through the cards, you'll see there's other cards that bring things out of the deck directly, bring things out of the hand, and it does make it really powerful to be able to generate some resources with this card when you put it out. Alternatively, that second effect where you can return a banished level 4 or lower spellcaster to the grave doesn't come up as much, but it does synergize with the rest of the archetype and is useful on certain occasions. Next up is Endymion, the Magistus of Mastery. This is Endymion when he's younger, obviously. A level 4 water spellcaster monster with the following effect. You can target one Magistus monster you control, equip it with a Magistus monster from your extra deck. So this is really powerful for reasons we'll get to in a bit. You can target one face-up spell you control, destroy it, and if you do, draw one card, then place one card from your hand on the bottom of the deck. You can only use each effect of Endymion, the Magistus of Mastery, once per turn. The once per turn restriction is obviously understandable, because if you could just keep equipping with stuff from the extra deck, it would be really powerful really quickly. That spell effect as well does come in handy quite a bit. There's certain cards you can combo with, but also when it's equipped with a Magistus, that is treated as a spell. So it does give you the ability to refresh your hand a bit if you need to, and to generate some positive plays if your hand is terrible and you might have a chance at getting something better by using his effect. Being a level 4 water monster does synergize with Crowley, so you can make Bahamut Shark, so ideally seeing this and Crowley, or some way to get to them both, is a really powerful opening hand for the deck. Zoro, the Magistus of Flame, is the ultra rare from Genesis Impact, a level 4 fire warrior spellcaster monster. They're all spellcasters. It is also a tuner, which is really neat. It has the same effect that says you can target one Magistus monster you control, equip it with one Magistus monster from your extra deck. If this card becomes equipped with a Magistus monster, you can special summon one level 4 spellcaster from your hand or graveyard, but negate its effects. So not only does it trigger its own effect, where you can put it into play and then you can equip it with something and special a monster from your hand or graveyard, giving you a free extender, it does give you an immediate setup for any synchro summon. You can summon this, special summon a level 4, and then make a Borreload Savage Dragon, or even Magistus' own synchro monster. There's plenty of combos you can do, and we'll talk about it a little bit later in the video. The negation of the effect makes complete sense. It would be extremely powerful if you could revive something like Riliona, get an extra search, and then do that again. It's just a balancing factor that needs to exist with the card. But this is way better than I gave it credit for just in playtesting, and I'm really excited to kind of showcase you guys how it works so well within the build. It does not have to be normal summon to use any of its effects either, but it generally does end up being your starting play and can get your combos rolling depending on what else you have in your hand. Moving on to the extra deck, we have Riliona, the Wondrous Magistus Witch Wardrobe, which is definitely a mouthful, a rank 4 spellcaster monster, 2 level 4 spellcasters with different attributes, so that's effortlessly easy to do in this deck. You can detach one material from this card, special summon one Magistus monster from your deck. You cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of the turn, except Magistus monsters. That's definitely a bit of a drawback, but if you do your combos right, you are able to set it up such that you can make a Savage Dragon or a Toad/Shark before putting this out, and that effect doesn't end up negatively impacted. In my opinion, the best card Magistus has access to from the extra deck is Atwas, which is a fusion monster, and I'll show you why in a moment. But being able to get to that quicker by detaching a material from this, special summoning Riliona, and searching a spell, which will then let you fusion summon, is a really powerful combo you can use to finish plays. This also has a secondary effect that states while this card is equipped to a monster, you can target one effect monster your opponent controls, negate its effects until the end of this turn. It's definitely neat, but the targeting is what makes it kind of hard to utilize. Sometimes you can force a negation, so at least it has that going for it, but its first effect is definitely more powerful in terms of what it does for the deck. The other Xyz is Ninaruru, the Magistus Glass Goddess. This is a rank 4 spellcaster. 2 level 4 spellcaster monsters to make it. While this card is an equip card, the equipped monster can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. You can only use each of the following effects of this card once per turn. You can detach one material from this card, then target one level 4 or higher spellcaster monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. This obviously synergizes well with all of the main deck monsters. You can bring any of them back to the hand, but it also recycles cards like Effect Veiler, giving you an opportunity to utilize another hand trap that you may have already used earlier in the game, or discarded for something else. The secondary effect that it has is while this card is equipped to a monster, you can target one Magistus card in your spell and trap zone, and one spell and trap your opponent controls, destroy them. It's a Scrap Dragon effect, and one of the Magistus cards actually allows you to banish itself from grave to protect your Magistus spell and traps from destruction, so you can combo to pop your opponent's card without having to get rid of your own, which is definitely something that comes in handy if you're facing back row heavy decks, or there's just a problematic card you need to get over. Alright, Iwas the Magistus Spell Spirit is a level 8 fusion monster, a Wind Fiend type monster. It is not a spellcaster. I wish it was, because it would combo really well with things like Magicalized Fusion, but I understand why it's not. While this card is an equip card, the equipped monster gains 1000 attack and defense. During the main phase, quick effect, you can target one monster, face-up monster on the field except this card. This card you control becomes equipped to that monster. If you equip to an opponent's monster by this effect, take control of that monster. Also, it cannot activate its effects. The fusion materials are one Magistus monster and one spellcaster, so it's basically makeable with almost anything in your deck. This is a really good disruption play to stop the opponent. If you have a Toad out and like a back row set, and then you make this and pass, you can quick effect on your opponent's turn to take control of a card that they put into play, either forcing them to get rid of this before they make any plays, which is a good, advantage to have, especially with the Toad and any other disruption you may have. But generally speaking, especially against slower decks or decks that are reliant on a combo piece to get going, you can quick effect, take their monster, similar to like a Crackdown, and then you're able to recycle this card in the deck as well, which is why I think it's really the best thing they have going for it. I've, in playtesting, found this to be the most useful, but it does have, the targeting thing that makes it a bit of a drawback. I understand some of the reasons that this card isn't, like, immediately meta, but I do think it's one that may be a bit overlooked and could potentially be useful down the line. Alright, the second best one being Artemis the Magistus Moon Maiden. This is a Link 1, which generally means great things for any deck. This is one level 4 or lower spellcaster monster to make. If another Magistus monster is normal or special summoned while you control this card, except during the damage step, you can target one of those monsters and equip this card to it. While this card is equipped to a monster, you can add one Magistus monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Artemis once per turn. You can only special summon Artemis the Magistus Moon Maiden once per turn. So, many of you may know this card from Invoked. It's played with the Invoked engine because Alistair can make this and get to Mikaba quickly. However, I think in this deck, it's really, really powerful simply because all you have to do is utilize one of your main deck monsters to equip it. Then you get a free search, which allows you to go off, especially if you're using something like Crowley, where you're not using your normal summon and you can summon whatever you bring out to set up combos going forward. Alternatively, you can also use this with things like Borreload Savage Dragon. If you equip this to Savage, you can still get the search. It does not have to be equipped to a Magistus monster, and this is really just an insanely good combo starter for the deck. You don't really summon it a ton, although there are some scenarios where you will if you need to get something in your graveyard to set up a play. It's just way too good not to utilize, and probably a card that will continue to see rises in value over time due to its uses outside of the deck, but also I think if, Magistus were to get more support, this is going to be one of the first things you really look to as an insanely good enabler for the deck. And lastly, for the extra deck, Varam the Magistus Divinity Dragon. It's definitely a bit lackluster compared to the others, but it does have its uses, and within the archetype, it is powerful. It is a level 8 Dragon Fire Synchro monster. While this card is an equip card, the equipped monster cannot be destroyed by your opponent's spell or trap effects. Definitely neat. I don't know how much spell and trap destruction we see nowadays, but it does exist, and certainly it's nice to have protection against it. You can only use each of the following effects of this card once per turn. If this Synchro Summon card is destroyed, you can destroy all face-up cards your opponent controls. At the start of the damage step, if the monster this card is equipped to battles an opponent's monster, you can destroy that monster. So it is a Cataster, but it's also a board wipe if it gets popped, and it does not have to be popped by your opponent's card, which is neat. I was playing this in Laval because you could pop it with Archer, revive Archer, and then blow up your opponent's board, and I do think there are some niche uses for this card outside of Magistus. I'll be honest, I don't go into it a ton, but it does offer protection, and it does offer you a way to out-problematic cards because you can just run into it and destroy it. Unfortunately, it doesn't out things like Avermax because it has built-in destruction protection if it's made with Masquerena, but there are big problematic monsters that it can pop, and that's useful enough to keep around. Not to mention, I do play Magical Eyes Fusion in the deck for cards like Mysterion the Dragon Crown, which is a neat option to have, and once this is in the graveyard, you can pretty much do whatever you need to do with it from a fusion perspective. Moving on to the spells, which is another strength of the deck. Magistus Vritra. Target one level 4 or lower Magistus monster in your graveyard, special summon it. If a Magistus card or cards in your spell and trap zone will be destroyed by your opponent's card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. So it's an in-archetype monster reborn that is searchable. It's really solid to, extend your plays, make combos, and it does have built-in protection that, while it may not come up a ton, it's still useful enough that, if your opponent plays Lightning Storm, Twin Twister, something other than Cosmic Cyclone that's going to destroy your spells and traps, you have ways to protect it. Alright, next up is Magistus Theurgy. It's a quick play spell. You target a Magistus monster you control and equip it with a Magistus monster from your extra deck, graveyard, or field, except a level 4 monster. So in other words, you can't equip the main deck monsters to it. If you have at least one of each Magistus, being a Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, and Link in your graveyard, you can equip that monster with a non-Magistus monster from your extra deck instead. Neat effect. It's kind of cute. It doesn't come up often at all. It's really not worth going the extra mile for. There are some cards from the extra deck you could equip, like Shooting Quasar Dragon, or some of the stuff that Dogmatica plays that triggers when sent to grave, but more often than not, you don't need to do that. This is used to either equip your Artemis out if you didn't draw into a self-equip, or to equip out something you may need to out a problem. If you need to get Leona's Xyz to negate a monster effect, or if you need to get Varam to destroy a monster in battle. It allows you to sort of stack equips and get additional boosts on your monsters, which is just really cool because the mechanic as a whole is really neat and exciting to play. Trismegistus is a continuous spell. The first time each Magistus monster you control that is equipped with an equipped card to be destroyed by battle each turn, it is not destroyed. That's fine. It doesn't come in handy much, but it's still a neat addition to have on the card. You can only use one of the following effects of this card once per turn, and only once that turn. So you can either, during your main phase, special summon a level 4 spellcaster monster from your hand, which is great. It's a really solid extender that can help you to mitigate dead hands. Or you can send this face-up card to the graveyard, special summon any number of Magistus monsters with different names from your hand. This can be insane. There are combos you can do where you get a bunch of Magistus monsters in hand, you drop them all out, and you end up with a really powerful board. It doesn't happen as often as you'd like, simply because the deck is subject to bricking, as I've said, but having access to that extra effect, especially on a card like this that's searchable by YuGiOh, is never a bad thing. At worst, it's an extender for the field, and at best, it's a combo that can really help you to push for, a really tough board for the opponent to break if they don't have the immediate outs for it. And lastly, Magistus Invocation, obviously drawing inspiration from the Invocation spell. Fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as material, including a spellcaster monster. If summoning a Magistus fusion monster this way, you can also use monsters in your spell and trap zones that are equipped to a Magistus monster. So this is neat. Typically you're using this to summon Iwas, which is super easy to do. Really, all you have to do is have this in hand and have a Magistus monster in your, main monster zone, and then have it equipped with something, and you can put Iwas out. It's really powerful. It almost never bricks simply because of how easy it is to pull off, and it does help you to get that additional disruption on the board. Now, I'm only playing 2 of this in my deck, and I'll show you why when we get there. Some decks do play 3, and I understand the logic behind wanting to see it, but it is searchable, and more often than not, you have more than one way to get to it. I'd like to maximize, or at least minimize the amount of bricking, but maximize the good hands that the deck can have. Still, this would be broken if you could utilize it, the monsters in the spell and trap zone, for any purpose, because you could play things like Mysterion the Dragon Crown, and even some other more generic fusions that aren't specifically a Magistus fusion, and you'd have access to way more combos that would really kind of push things a bit too far. So, that's going to do it for the main archetype. We've taken a look at all the cards there. What we'll do next is we'll jump into some of the user decks that I found online, a couple different ones to take a look at and review, and then I'll show you my own build and kind of talk about the reasons that I chose the cards that I did. Alright, so I ended up going with the Pendulum variant first. I found this. This is not my build, but one of the ones I found online was really unique in the sense that it combined the Spellcaster Endymion Pendulum engine with a few of the Magistus cards. Now, one of the things about this that's a little bit kind of frustrating is that it doesn't play too much in terms of Magistus, so it's a little hard to call it that in general, but I guess it does play YuGiOh, Crowley, Endymion. And you have your Choice Magistus in the spell slot there, so it's close enough. The cards themselves do work really well with certain Spellcaster engines, so I understand the logic behind trying this out. This would not be my ideal build. I played a few games with it. I went about even, give or take. Now, that part of that could be because of my inexperience playing with Spellcaster Pendulums in general. I'm sure there's plenty of people who could probably pilot this deck a lot more effectively, but I get the gist of it. It does seem to basically just be a bunch of powerful Spellcaster cards with a lot of one-ofs, utilizing the benefits that you do get from the Endymion, popping stuff, and there's a lot to look at there. The spell power mastery is solid enough, and Duelist Alliance Pendulum Call just kind of helps you dig into the deck to get what you need faster. Wasn't a huge fan of like the random one-ofs for certain monsters, as well as like the 2 tactics. Personally, wasn't my choice, and definitely not where I would go with it. Extra deck was neat enough, but there's a lot of choices I think were questionable. My recommendation, if you're interested in the Pendulum variant, would definitely be to either A, reference a Pendulum build that you're more comfortable with and sort of make some changes, figure out which Magistus cards you think are, effective or may actually add to the combo rather than just being there for the sake of being there, and see if you can't make that work. But I think consistency is still important, and while the deck does have ways to search a lot, it does feel like it can be relatively easily stopped. So I would focus either on the Magistus engine or the Endymion engine, the sort of mix of these two, as much as it is a cute concept and you do get the benefit of pendulums being able to be popped. This was not my preferential build to play. Alright, and so for the second one, this is a bit of a hybrid deck too. It looks like it's a combination of Shaddoll, Dogmatica, and Magistus. It's unique. One of the things that stands out to me right off the bat is the one-ofs on hand traps. I am not a fan of that. I definitely think it's better to pick one and focus on it. Like, you're either going to play 3 Ash, 3 Nibiru, maybe 2 and 2 if you want to go that route, but these 4 random ones here, this just wasn't for me. I did find that, more often than not, I would see a hand trap in a hand when I was playing, and it wasn't something I actually wanted. I was like, oh, I really wish this would have been something else, and just based on numbers and odds, you increase your chances of getting the hand trap that's going to be more helpful to you based on how many you're playing. This is also playing a few of the Dogmatica cards that I am just not a fan of. I don't know what the logic behind this build was. I do try to find decks just from random sources on the internet, whether it's Reddit, whether it's YuGiOh Pro, all over the place. I kind of look for about like 10 to 12 different builds, pick a few random ones to showcase. I'm not always showcasing like the best ones. I'm just showcasing different builds that like I find online that people put out that I use as at least inspiration to kind of see what types of strategies have been put there. With this deck, I did play it. I did find that bricking happened quite a bit, and a lot of that may be because of the random one-ofs. Some of the Dogmatica cards like Theo and some of the lesser used ones definitely are not good things to draw into. The Shadal stuff works, and it does synergize really well with the Magistus engine. I just don't love this whole massive amounts of one-ofs in the deck. I just think there's so many better ways to really allocate your resources and get to what you need more frequently. So this bricked a ton. I think on paper, the idea of like combining the Dogmatica with the Magistus can work depending on, you know, how reliant you are on getting your first turn plays off and what type of approach you're taking with the deck. But this was not my favorite. I actually feel like I had better luck with the first profile than this, and I wasn't super impressed by either one. That being said, it did show me sort of what things don't work and why consistency can be so important with Magistus as a whole, and gave me some additional ideas with my own build. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into my own deck profile now and show that off, and I'll talk to you guys about how it went. So this is my finished build. I really like it. It's basically one I've been playing both in real life and online, and I'm honestly super happy with the result. It took a lot of fine-tuning. I actually started working on the idea of a Magistus build back before I was even doing this series, so it's been going on for a while, but I've had many different iterations of this build, and I think this is probably the best it's come out so far. So let's go through the deck quickly in case anyone's actually interested in the logistics behind the choices, and then I'll just talk about it briefly. I know some people are probably just going to skip through to this point in the video and just want to see the deck profile, so that's fine too. Like, obviously, not everybody wants to sit there and watch, but hopefully those of you that did stay for the whole thing are enjoying it, or at least learned a little something about Magistus as a whole. So, for the main deck, I've got triple Crowley, triple Zora, triple Endymion, and triple Liliona. I think you have to max out on the Magistus cards you have simply because there's just so few of them, and they're all essential to combos. Crowley is really, really solid because he can change his attribute to water, so there's the Bahamut Shark Toad combo you can do, and on certain boards you can do the Bahamut Shark Toad play and end on like a Borreload Savage or an Iwas or something else where you have a couple of responsive plays that gives you, you know, a solid start against the opponent. If you combo that with a Secret Village or Nibiru or something, you are technically, you know, in a position where you might actually be able to make a strong counter play. The other spellcaster monsters in the main deck, one Trick Clown, one Hat Trick, one Damage Juggler. I know I did say I'm not a huge fan of one-ofs, but that mostly applies to hand traps. I think the little Performage engine does work pretty well for what it's worth. You can discard Trick Clown to summon Crowley, and then Clown revives itself. Hat Trick is just a decent extender, and Damage Juggler serves, you know, multiple purposes in terms of helping you thin the deck, get access to an extender if you need it, but also, you know, just being a generally decent card. I think one of each is fine, especially considering I wanted to keep this at 40, you know, as much as possible. And then for the hand trap, I chose 3 Nibiru. I do think that Ash Blossom is good too, but Nibiru is just really strong, especially because there are times where you don't have the best board setup, and being able to put a Nibiru token out, and then I had one game specifically come up where I Nibiru'd my opponent's board and put a token out that was like 7,500 or something, and then on my turn, when it came back around to me, I made the Iwas and I equipped it to the Nibiru token, took control of it, and actually attacked for game with the token and my own Nibiru, which was just a funny play. It doesn't happen a ton, but generally speaking, due to the nature of the deck being sort of reactive, kind of to a fault, but it's still solid, I think Nibiru is the best choice. Liliona, the, you know, level 4 is such a good searcher. Like, getting access to Magistus Invocation is really solid, and you can actually pull it out directly from the deck, so there's a lot of things going for it. Endymion is awesome, being draw power that also helps you to cycle through some of your already used cards. Zora, I said it before when I was going through the actual cards, I like him a lot simply because he's like a decent extender, but he also is a searcher. Like, you summon him, you equip an Artemis, and then you can search, or you bait an Ash or something, but at least you have the ability to set up plays that can kind of lead into other things. And one of the things that happens with the deck a ton, obviously, is it can brick. And if it does brick, it's hard to rebound from, but having access to something like that does help. Now for the spells, I've got triple Magistus, Theurgy, I think this is really, really solid at 3. It's the quick play that equips one from the deck. In other words, it basically functions like a Rhoda. You can equip an Artemis and search, but it does a lot of other things too, in terms of, like, you can grab, you know, the Synchro, I always mispronounce his name, but you can grab the Synchro Magistus, and then you can turn your monster into a Catastor, and you protect it from spell and trap destruction. And then you can also grab Ninaruru, and you can make 2 attacks, or you can pop a spell or trap. It's basically like a tool that lets you get to whatever you need, versus the other one, which is Vritra, which is a Monster Reborn. It's a solid card for sure, and it definitely does come in handy, but 2 is fine, I think, specifically because more often than not in the game, you're not going to resolve more than 1 copy of that, and 2, especially for a card that's searchable, is usually sufficient. And then for the last 2 Magistus spells, I got 2 Invocation, Magistus Invocation. It's really, really solid because of how good Iwas is, but once you kind of do that play, it does brick later in the game. I don't typically want to see this turn 4 or 5. Like, I want to see it early, or I don't really want to see it at all, because at that point, I'm going to switch to a more Xyz-centric strategy to try to utilize things like Trice Magistus, which basically lets you drop your hand on the board, or at the very least serve as an extender. In conjunction, all of these spells work really well with one another, and so I think that's a perfect number. I think 3 and then 2 of all the others, but obviously you can interchange it however you want. For the 1-ups, I have 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, 1 Terraforming, 1 Monster Reborn, and 1 Called by the Grave. These are all relatively standard choices, but they, you know, you can interchange them for other things. You don't have to play Monster Reborn. I do think because you have monsters that do trigger off of a summon, like Riliona does, or monsters that you can revive and then further ladder up into other combos, it is good to have that extra extender, but there's certainly other options. Triple Book of Moon, I can't say enough about how good I think this card is. I think it's super effective at, like, disrupting plays. I think it's seen a lot of favor more recently in the format as people see it as an option to stop links or to disrupt, you know, a deck that has 2 monsters on the field before they can Synchro or Xyz. You just kind of book one of the monsters. Book of Moon is a really effective, disruptive card that I like a lot in the deck, and so I am happy to play that here. It never really bricks, and it's such a useful, like, Swiss Army knife type card that kind of helps no matter what situation you're in. And then 2 Secret Village of the Spellcasters. I love this card. I came up with this idea just thinking because there are a lot of decks that are pretty spell heavy still to this day, and being able to shut those spells down is really effective. It's particularly good against decks like Drytron, where they don't really have a Spellcaster. There's not really an easy way for them to get one on the board. You have plenty of spellcasters, and as long as you end the turn with 1 on the board, you basically lock your opponent out of spells or force them to play around this, and that is not necessarily easy to do. So you have the benefit of, like, this card being something you could easily side out in later games depending on your matchups, but it's worth it to have early on. And having those 3 cards to side out with the 2 Secret Village and the 1 Terraforming is really nice because it makes it easy to kind of gather what you want to get sided in. And then for the traps, I have 3 Judgment and 1 Skill Drain. Skill Drain is a weird card here, but I like it more than I dislike it because of the fact that most of your Magistus equips activate as spells and traps, so they're not impacted by Skill Drain at all, but your opponent is going to be significantly hit by Skill Drain in most cases. Really what you have to do is set up your board first. Obviously Toad gets around Skill Drain, but some of your other monsters don't. You have to pick and choose whether or not it works for you. If people lean towards something else with the deck, I would definitely understand that, but for me, I like it and it's worked out pretty solid. And then Solemn Judgment is just pretty much Solemn Judgment. You could play Strike, you could play Impermanence. I just think it's good to have a little bit of extra control. The deck does play a sort of, you know, I make my 1 or 2 extra deck monsters, set a few, pass, and Judgment allows you to go back and forth and have some responses to things. So that's why I chose it there. Extra deck is super standard, I think, for Magistus as a whole. 2 Artemis, it's way too good to only play 1. You obviously can utilize this to, you know, equip something, but the searches are good, and it has a lot going for it. Selene is just a ridiculously effective card when you can make it, and you have spells engrave, you can revive stuff, and just further extend. Masquerena and Nightmare Unicorn is just a good combo to have. You don't do it a ton, but you can make a Masquerena before you make your Riliona, and then you're not locked into spellcasters on your opponent's turn, so there's different ways to make that work. Bahamut and Toad is just insanely good. You can play any rank 4s here, but I think Dweller and Tornado Dragon are just solid outs to things. The 2 Magistus Xyz monsters are both really good 1-ups. The new Riliona is awesome in terms of pulling stuff from the deck. I think this gives it a huge boost. It does lock you out of summoning from the extra deck except Magistus, but it's only for the rest of the turn. So if you do your other combos first, you're pretty solid going forward. And then, of course, there's Borreload Savage Dragon. It's not hard to make, and it is really solid. Not to mention, it does trigger Artemis. It counts as being equipped, so you can do that. And you have Vajiram, or whatever his name is here. Just a decent card with multiple uses. And of course, I think the MVP of the deck being Iwas the Spell Spirit. This is disruptive, takes control of your opponent's monsters, is super easy to make, and really gives you another reactive play. So overall, that rounds out my build. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this. I'd like to, hear your thoughts. If there's things you dislike or things you'd play differently in your own builds, definitely let me know. And let me know in the comments what other decks you want to see featured on this segment. And try to do it once a week. I'm cutting it close to the wire with this one. As it is, I think the final editing of this is going to be like right before it's uploaded on Friday. But hopefully you guys will enjoy it regardless. Let me know in the comments below what other ones you want to see. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time right here at Loveshack.